You feel that something is wrong, but you don't know exactly what. You wake up every day with that feeling of being out of place, as if you are living a life that isn't yours. Maybe you've tried everything: therapy, self-help books, advice from friends. But the emptiness remains, an uncomfortable feeling of displacement, as if you are following a path that doesn't make sense, that doesn't represent you. And do you know why? Because maybe you really are on the wrong path. But here's the truth that no one told you. It doesn't mean you are broken. It simply means you have strayed from who you really are. Carl Gustav Jung, one of the greatest thinkers of the human psyche, said that every human being is born with an internal map, what he called the map of the soul. An invisible, profound guide that directs us toward our true nature. But there's a problem. Almost no one learns to read this map. Instead, we are trained from an early age to follow the maps of others, of society, family, culture. And then, without realizing it, we begin to walk paths that take us away from who we truly are. We make choices that do not reflect our essence. We live relationships that drain us. We wear masks to fit into places we should never be. And over time, this internal dissonance turns into pain, into anguish, into apathy. The map of the soul is not a poetic metaphor. It is real. Jung dedicated his life to exploring it, mapping the deep territories of the human psyche, the archetypes, the unconscious, the shadow, the self. And what he discovered was both frightening and liberating. Most of our suffering does not come from chance or bad luck. It comes from ignoring this map, from living outward, not inward, from following patterns that were imposed on us when we should have been following the calls of our soul. If you feel lost, directionless, if you feel like you are sinking even while trying to swim, this video is for you. Because here, I am not going to give you a magic formula. I will offer you something more powerful, a return to what you already carry within you. The truth is that your soul has been speaking to you for a long time, in dreams, in crises, in uncomfortable silences. It's just that you haven't learned to listen. Jung believed that these feelings of emptiness, failure, confusion are, in fact, invitations. Invitations to begin the most important journey of your life, the journey of individuation, the reconnection with who you really are. So, if you are tired of feeling inadequate, exhausted from pretending that everything is fine while inside you are in ruins, know that you are not alone, and certainly not broken. Your suffering is not a defect. It is a sign, a call. And if you have the courage to answer it, to dive deep and face the unknown within yourself, you will discover that what seemed like weakness was just a detour, that what seemed like darkness was the beginning of your own light. This video is an invitation. A map in the right hands can change an entire life. The question is, are you ready to unveil it? Imagine that within you exists a vast, mysterious territory filled with symbolic forests, emotional abysses, mountains of forgotten wisdom, and underground rivers of desire and fear. Now imagine that this territory can be explored, understood, mapped. This is what Carl Jung offers us with his theory of the map of the soul, a true cartography of the human psyche, constructed not with compasses and satellites, but with dreams, myths, symbols, and human suffering. For Jung, the map of the soul is not a rational, logical, or linear construction. It is a set of living symbols that emerge from the depths of the unconscious. Contrary to what we have been taught, the psyche is not just a collection of loose thoughts. It is structured. It has a center, the self, a social facade, the persona, a field of hidden conflicts, the shadow, and internal figures that represent the inner feminine and masculine, anima and animus. And it is from the tension between these internal forces that our dilemmas, traumas, dreams, and quests arise. The ego, what you think you are, is merely the starting point. The ego believes it is in control, but in reality, it is like a traveler who wakes up in the middle of a forest without a map or compass. This is why so many feel lost, because they are trying to make decisions based on a superficial self, disconnected from the totality of the psyche, without understanding that there are much deeper forces operating behind every choice, every blockage, every impulse. Jung discovered this by exploring his own dreams and visions, diving into an intense process of self-analysis. It was in this dive that he began to see recurring symbolic patterns, universal images that appeared both in his own dreams and in those of his patients, and that also showed up in ancient mythologies, religions, fairy tales, and works of art. He called them archetypes, the basic elements of the map of the soul. They are like ancestral landmarks that indicate key points in the human journey: birth, death, love, loss, rebirth. And each of us travels this path in a unique way, but always passing through the same portals. But most importantly, this map is not just for understanding, it is for transformation. Through the process of individuation, the central journey of Jungian psychology, we are called to stop being just a reactive and limited ego and to become an integrated self, someone who lives authentically, aligned with their deepest essence. This process is anything but easy. It involves confronting the shadow, detaching from the persona, facing the unconscious. But it is the only path to a meaningful life. When you ignore this map, life becomes a succession of mistakes, repetitions, and frustrations. But when you begin to understand it, even if in a fragmented way, you start to see that each symptom, each crisis, each pain is a message. And this message comes from within. The soul does not scream, it whispers. And those who do not learn to listen to the whispers of the soul end up hearing the screams of the body, anxiety, depression, and loss of meaning. Now that you understand what this map is, you may be wondering, but where exactly am I on it? How can I know if I am on the right path or getting more lost? This is what we will talk about in the next part: the anatomy of the soul according to Jung, and how to recognize the signs that you are off your path. If the soul has a map, it also has a structure. Understanding this structure is essential not only for you to locate yourself, but also to understand why you are where you are. Carl Jung compared the psyche to a house with many rooms, levels, and secret corridors. Most people live locked in just one of these rooms, the ego, ignoring the colossal forces that operate in the deeper floors. It's like trying to navigate the ocean by only looking at the surface of the water. Let's start where everyone begins, the ego. It is the center of your consciousness, the I that you believe you are. It is necessary, but limited. The ego organizes the perception of reality, but it is only a part of your soul, a small part, surrounded by forces it does not control. Below it lies the personal unconscious, where repressed memories, unresolved traumas, and denied desires reside. There are the complexes, emotional cores that control behaviors without you realizing it. Have you ever felt like you repeat the same mistakes? That you always attract the same type of relationship? That you flee from something you can't even name? That is the personal unconscious in action. But Jung went further. He realized that there is an even deeper universal layer that all human beings share, the collective unconscious. And it is in this layer that the archetypes reside, primordial images that structure our life experience. No matter where you were born or in what era you lived, we all have within us the same archetypal figures: the hero, the mother, the wise old man, the child, the rebel, the lover. These archetypes are not just symbols. They are living forces that shape our desires, choices, fears, and impulses. And between the ego and the self, which is the organizing core of the psychic totality, there are three fundamental structures that directly influence how you relate to the world and to yourself: persona, shadow, and the archetypes of the opposite sex. Anima and animus. The persona is the social mask you wear to adapt and survive. It is the role you learn to play to be accepted, whether as the exemplary child, the competent professional, the class clown, or the ideal romantic partner. It is useful, but also dangerous, because the more you identify with this mask, the more you distance yourself from your truth. The persona is the outfit the soul wears to go out in public, but it should never be confused with the skin. The shadow, on the other hand, is the opposite. Everything you hide, reject, or deny in yourself. Your flaws, your unacceptable desires, your anger, envy, jealousy, shame. But the shadow also carries hidden potentials, repressed talents, unrecognized strength, stifled creativity. Facing the shadow is painful but necessary, because everything you do not integrate dominates you. Everything you do not accept in yourself, you project onto others. What you hate in others is often what you cannot bear to recognize in yourself. And then we have anima and animus, the internal figures of the opposite sex that inhabit each of us. For men, the anima represents the inner feminine principle: sensitivity, intuition, receptivity, connection to the unconscious. For women, the animus represents the inner masculine principle: reason, action, firmness, direction. These figures do not pertain to gender, but to psychic polarities. When ignored, anima and animus manifest in distorted ways, in toxic relationships, destructive idealizations, or emotional rigidity. But when integrated, they become bridges to the self, paving the way for a more complete, balanced, and creative psyche. Finally, at the deepest center of the soul, we find the self, the true self. Not what you think you are, but what you are in essence. The self is wholeness, integration, balance. It is the instance that calls you to evolution, individuation, and reconnecting with your own truth. When you live far from the self, you feel fragmented, exhausted, empty. When you approach it, you begin to feel meaning, purpose, and direction. The great modern tragedy is that we have been trained to live outwardly, ignoring all of this. We have been educated to please, compete, and display, not to feel, integrate, and understand. And that is why so many live in conflict, because they are trapped in fragile personas, fleeing from the shadow, disconnected from the self, and without even knowing that anima and animus are operating in the background of all their relationships. Now that you understand how your soul is structured, the inevitable question arises: what happens when you ignore all of this? What happens when you live only as ego, shaped by the persona, fleeing from the shadow without ever listening to the self? This is exactly what we will talk about in the next part: the modern errors. How society conditions us to follow paths that completely distance us from the soul, and why this makes us sick inside. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Have you ever stopped to wonder why so many people today live anxious, depressed, exhausted, even with seemingly successful lives? Why do so many people who have it all feel empty inside? The answer, according to Jung, lies in the fact that most of us are not living an authentic life, but rather a borrowed one. We follow scripts that we did not write, pursue goals that we never questioned, and lose ourselves in identities that were given to us, not chosen. Modern society has created a value system that rewards appearance, performance, and productivity. From an early age, we are taught to compete, to win, to please. We are told who we should be, what we should desire, how we should behave. The result? We create a socially acceptable persona, but increasingly distant from the self. We become experts at performing and amateurs at truly living. This conditioning begins in childhood. We learn that feeling too much is weakness, that making mistakes is unacceptable, that showing vulnerability is dangerous. We repress our shadow to avoid rejection. We suppress creative impulses for fear of seeming strange. We replace our desires with others' expectations, and so, little by little, we drift away from the center. When we realize it, we no longer know who we are, only who we have learned to appear to be. In adulthood, this deviation intensifies. The pressure to fit into the success model is brutal. A solid career, a stable relationship, social status, impeccable appearance. The soul, forgotten, but the self does not disappear. It merely changes the way it manifests. And when it is not heard, it screams. And its screams are heard as symptoms: anxiety, existential crises, addictions, psychosomatic illnesses, empty relationships, a fatigue that does not go away with rest. Jung saw these manifestations not as failures, but as calls from the soul, alerts that we are living off-center, distant from our inner truth. We live in a world that idolizes extroversion, charisma, exposure. But not everyone was born to be seen. Some were born to see, others to create, still others to heal, to silence, to observe. The problem is that by standardizing the ideal of life, modern culture transforms unique talents into apparent flaws. The introspective becomes too shy, the sensitive becomes fragile, the reflective becomes slow. And in this process, entire archetypes are suffocated. The healer is ignored, the artist is mocked, the mystic is ridiculed. Worse still, our society not only ignores the unconscious, it fears it. And what culture fears, it pathologizes. The result is an entire generation that feels broken for not being able to fit into a mold that was never made for them. But there is a way out. Jung believed that suffering is often the beginning of healing, because it forces us to stop, to look within, to question. And in that moment, if we have the courage, we can begin the process of returning to the self, which Jung called individuation. And this return begins with a fundamental step, recognizing the signs that we are off our path. Symptoms that are not failures, but compasses, sensations that, if listened to attentively, can point the way back to the soul. In the next part, we will delve into exactly that. What does it mean to be on the wrong path? What are the invisible signs, the emotional symptoms, the repetitive patterns that indicate you are drifting away from who you really are, and how to begin to walk the path back? Being on the wrong path does not only mean making bad decisions or suffering external consequences. Being on the wrong path, from Jung's deep perspective, means living disconnected from your essence, from your innermost truth. And that always comes at a cost. The soul knows when you are drifting away from your center. And even if your mind tries to rationalize, pretend, or ignore, the signs always appear. They come in subtle forms at first, like restlessness, inexplicable boredom, small discomforts. But if you insist on ignoring these whispers, the soul begins to scream. And the screams are loud enough to paralyze your life. The first symptoms are often emotional. A fatigue that doesn't go away with rest. An anxiety that has no concrete cause. A floating sadness that appears in moments when everything should be fine. You may have professional success, a stable relationship, an organized routine, and still feel empty. It's as if something inside you is dying in silence, as if life is happening outside and you are just a spectator. Then come the repetitive patterns, relationships that always end the same way, cycles of self-sabotage, decisions that cancel each other out. You feel like you're going in circles, trying to escape a maze with a map drawn by someone else. This happens because, as you drift away from the self, you begin to live under the control of autonomous complexes. Emotional fragments that take command of your psyche and lead you to repeat the same mistakes, even knowing where they lead. It's like watching a movie whose ending you already know, but you can't stop watching. Another powerful sign that you are off your path is the feeling of inner falseness. You may even maintain the appearance of normalcy, but inside you feel like you are acting, lying to yourself. You feel that life has lost its color, its passion, its meaning. And the more you try to distract yourself, keep busy, speed up, the more evident the inner abyss becomes. Life loses its flavor, days become repetitive, and all of this because you are living outwardly, but dying inside. But there is something even deeper. When you are distant from the self, dreams change. They become more symbolic, intense, disturbing. The unconscious begins to send clear messages that something important is being neglected. Jung saw dreams as letters from the self, and the greater the distance, the more urgent the content. Images of falls, blocked paths, abandoned houses, threatening figures. All of these are symbolic expressions of a soul trying to guide you back to the center. But it takes sensitivity to understand and courage to follow. And why does all this happen? Because the self, the totality of your soul, has a goal to make you become who you truly are, and it will not rest until that happens. Jung called this process individuation, and it is not comfortable. It is demanding, profound, challenging, because it requires confronting everything that has been repressed. Your shadow, your fears, your hidden desires, your forgotten potentials. And above all, it requires a dive into the unknown, into what you are not yet, but can become. So, if you feel lost, repeating patterns, emotionally drained, or living a life that seems not to belong to you, this is the call. Not as a punishment, but as an invitation. You are not being punished, you are being awakened. And this is precisely where the next step of the journey comes in. How to begin to walk the path back to the self. How to use this soul map in practice to rediscover meaning, reconnect with yourself, and transform pain into direction. In the next part, we will explore the tools and principles that Jung proposed to transform suffering into awareness and disorientation into clarity. So far, you have understood that there is a map, that the soul has a structure, that society teaches us to ignore it, and that the symptoms you feel are compasses disguised as pain. Now, the inevitable question is, how to return? How to find the way back? How to move from the surface of the persona and descend to the core of the self? The answer is not simple, because the journey of individuation is unique for each person. But Jung left us a set of principles, practices, and symbols that serve as navigation tools. He knew that the process of returning to the center could not be done through logical reasoning or the effort of willpower, because what is at stake here is not a problem to be solved. It is a soul that needs to be heard. The first tool is the observation of dreams. Jung said that dreams are spontaneous manifestations of the unconscious, symbolic messages sent directly from the self. They reveal hidden truths, unconscious patterns, repressed desires, and also indicate directions. But to understand them, one must learn to read the symbolic language. Dreams do not speak in direct words. They speak in metaphors, images, atmospheres. A crumbling path may signify the collapse of a limiting belief. A wild animal chasing you may represent a repressed impulse that needs to be integrated. Each dream is a fragment of your own map. The second tool is active imagination, a technique developed by Jung to dialogue with the internal figures of the psyche. It involves allowing images from the unconscious to manifest in a waking state, through writing, drawing, visualization, or meditation. It is a way to encounter the shadow, the anima, or the animus, and understand what they are trying to communicate. Active imagination is not fantasy. It is listening. It is placing oneself before the inner unknown with presence and courage. It is making space for the unconscious to manifest, not as an enemy, but as an ally. Another essential path is the confrontation with the shadow. This means looking at what you reject in yourself, without judgment, without escape, without disguise. It is admitting the dark impulses, the hidden resentments, the vulnerabilities you hide even from yourself. But it is also recognizing the forgotten talents, the silenced desires, the suffocated potentials. The shadow is not a monster to be defeated. It is a piece of your soul crying out for recognition, and without it, individuation is impossible. Furthermore, it is necessary to understand the role of the persona and learn to dismantle it consciously. You need to identify the masks you wear at work, in relationships, on social media, and understand why they were constructed. The problem is not having a persona. We all do. The problem is believing that you are it. When you live identified with the mask, the self becomes unattainable. When you start to dismantle it, the true self begins to emerge. And of course, it is essential to integrate anima and animus. This requires a deep internal listening work. For men, developing the anima is cultivating sensitivity, intuition, and embracing the unconscious. For women, integrating the animus is accessing deep reason, inner direction, and assertiveness that arises from the center. When these polarities are denied, we project onto others what is lacking in us and create symbiotic, unbalanced, fanciful relationships. When they are integrated, we become whole. Finally, there is an element that runs through this entire journey: inner silence. We live in an era of constant noise, and it is precisely in silence that the self whispers. Hurry is the enemy of the soul. Individuation requires pause, presence, solitude. Not as escape, but as a spiritual practice. Because only in silence can you hear yourself without the filter of the world. These practices are not ready-made recipes. They are doors, tools, keys, and each person must discover their own rhythm, their own time, their own way of walking. The only real requirement is the willingness to face oneself, deeply, honestly, radically. But even with these tools, there is a trap that many face when starting this journey. The idea that they need to become someone else, that they need to completely transform to achieve wholeness. Jung said the opposite. The goal of individuation is not to become someone new. It is to become who you have always been, but did not yet know. And this leads us to the deepest part of this journey: integration. The moment when the fragmented parts begin to unite and true identity emerges from chaos. In the next part, we will explore what it means to integrate all these aspects of the psyche, and how this integration not only heals, but liberates. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebook, Beyond the Shadow. It breaks down Jung's core ideas and gives you tools to understand yourself more deeply. Link is in the pinned comment. We have reached the most decisive point of the journey: integration. Everything we have seen so far, the structure of the soul, the detours along the way, the symptoms of disconnection, the tools for return, leads us to this moment, the process in which everything that was separated begins to unite. Where the lost pieces of the soul are gathered, where what you have repressed, hidden, fragmented, finally begins to align with who you truly are. But what does it really mean to integrate? Integrating is not about eliminating what is uncomfortable. It is not about purifying oneself of negative feelings or transforming into an idealized version of oneself. That is spiritual ego. It is just another persona disguised as enlightenment. Integrating is radically accepting all the parts that exist within you. It is understanding that light and shadow are not enemies, but complementary. That weakness and strength do not cancel each other out. They balance each other. That within you coexist the creator and the destroyer, the healer and the wounded, the rebel and the complacent. And only by giving space to all these internal voices can you find your true voice. Jung said that individuation is the process of becoming who you are. It seems simple, but it is one of the hardest tasks of existence, because it requires courage to strip away what is comfortable, to abandon identities that have protected you for years, to stop seeking outside what can only be found within. Integration happens when you stop trying to be someone else and surrender to the work of being whole. It begins with awareness. When you recognize that you have a persona, but you are not it, when you see your shadow, but do not define yourself by it, when you find the anima or the animus and learn to listen to them, when you connect to the self, not as an abstract idea, but as a living presence within you. At this point, life ceases to be a battlefield between opposites and becomes a space for dialogue between parts. And the effects of this are profound. Anxiety begins to diminish, not because you have learned to control it, but because it no longer needs to scream to be heard. Relationships become more genuine because you stop projecting onto others what you lack in yourself. Unconscious repetitions dissolve because now there is someone at the helm, and that someone is you, whole. To integrate is to heal, but not in the superficial sense of the word. It is to heal the internal cracks caused by years of denial, escape, adaptation. It is to rebuild the bond with your soul. It is to live with direction, not as someone seeking a specific destination, but as someone who knows where they come from. It is to transform pain into power, confusion into clarity, emptiness into fertile space. But do not be mistaken. This journey has no end. Integration is not a destination. It is a continuous process, a constant dance between the conscious and the unconscious, between the known and the mysterious. And with each new cycle of your life, you become more whole, more true, more free. If something in this video touched you, if any word seemed to be spoken directly to your soul, leave a comment below. Tell me, where on the path do you find yourself now? What part of your soul do you feel is trying to come home? Your voice may be the beginning of someone's listening, and if you have made it this far, do not stop. The next video continues this journey. It is as important as this one. Sometimes, a single idea can change the course of your life. Keep watching. Your soul thanks you.